Good evening, everyone. I'm Lester Holt, and welcome to the first Democratic debate in the 2020 race for president.
Hi, I'm Savannah Guthrie, and tonight it's our first chance to see these candidates go head-to-head on stage together. We'll be joined...
Because of this large field, not every person will be able to comment on every topic, but over the course of the next 2 hours...
Giving your voters, people, a false sense of what's actually achievable. Well, first, that's time. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that question, Lester. You know, I grew up with a mother.
Congresswoman Gabbard, your thoughts on equal pay?
After the al-Qaeda terror attacks on 9/11.
Congressman Delaney, do you agree? We need to make sure everyone has a living wage. And I've called for a doubling of the earned income tax credit, raising the minimum wage.
Who here would abolish their private health insurance in favor of a government-run plan? Just a show of hands.
Come on, let's go. 1, 2, 3.
All right, well.
And on this debate, I'm sorry, there are too many people profiteering off of the pain of people in America, from pharmaceutical companies.
If the control room could turn off the mics. Yeah, if the control room could turn off the mics of our previous... As a woman, or let's also not forget someone in the trans community, a trans female.
We were on the verge of greatness. We were this close.
And it's going to take all of us coming together to make sure that it does.
La situación ahora es inaceptable.
¿Qué haría usted? And we will for a long time. Can we talk about the conditions as to why people are coming here?
Let's Lester.
Because
Savannah. I know it's just we could go on.
Worry about potentially incentivizing people to come here. Immigrants. Time. Thank you. Congressman Ryan.
Topic now. We've got a lot to get through. Let's talk.
My
we need to talk about.
Was actually separated from his family when he came to this country.
We're going to talk about Iran right now because we're working against the clock.
Random. Now, the candidates will have 60 seconds to answer, 30 seconds for a follow-up if necessary, and we will be ruthless if necessary.
Yeah, we can do that. By the way, hi, Rachel.
I see this happening. Number one, sure. I want to see us get a Democratic majority in the Senate. But short of a Democratic majority in the Senate, you better understand.
You got me?
Rachel.
You got me?
We're going to keep moving. Congressman Delaney, I'm going to get to you.
I introduced the only bipartisan carbon tax bill in the Congress.
All right.
The Taliban will grow, and they will have bigger...
Going to somehow squash this Taliban that has been there, that every other country that's tried
I didn't say squash them.
Senator
Two threats, economic threat, China, but our major threat right now is what's going on in the Mideast with Iran if we don't get our
try to keep it at one.
China, without a question, they're wiping us around the world economically.
Me llamo Julián Castro y estoy postulando por presidente de los Estados Unidos.
I am in this fight because I believe that we can make our government, we can make our economy, we can make our country work, not just for those at the top. We can make it work for everyone, and I promise you this, I will fight for you as hard as I fight for my own family.
They're wiping us.
I hadn't met her until very recently, and it's really different when you're actually in the room or when
What was different?
Because she's everyone's smaller.
Are in position, so let's get started.
20 candidates qualified for this first debate. As we said, we heard from 10 last night, and we'll hear from 10 more tonight. The break.
You said we shouldn't, quote, demonize the rich. You said nobody has to be punished. No one's standard of living would change. Nothing would fundamentally change.
If we don't clearly define that we are not socialists, the Republicans are going to come at us every way they can and call us socialists.
You were booed at the California Democratic Convention when you said that.
It's the greed of the NRA and the gun manufacturers that make any progress. There's a big difference between capitalism on the one hand and greed on the other.
My dad used to have an expression. He said, Joe, a job is about a lot more than a paycheck. It's about your dignity. It's about respect. It's being able to look your kid in the eye and say everything's going to be okay.
Is to give every adult in the United States $1,000 a month, no questions asked. That's right. I think that's like $3.2 trillion a year. How would you do that? Sorry? Spend that $1,000 on value-added tax?
Well, the value-added tax would end up.
Many Americans are worried that things like self-driving cars, robots.
We're going to solve the issues of automation, pass the torch. If we're going to solve the issues of climate chaos, pass the torch. If we're going to solve the issue of student loan debt, pass the torch. If we're going to end gun violence for families who are fearful of sending their kids to school, pass the torch.
Robots. Senator
We
Harris.
can't afford to wait for evolution on these issues.
Hey, guys, you know what? America does not want to witness a food fight. They want to know how we're going to put food on their table. Yes?
This one's very personal for me.
Look, this is very personal to me.
That every other major country on earth, including my neighbor 50 miles north of me, Canada.
Wow! Millions of people in America that do not have health insurance today because they can't, they're too wealthy.
How this affects real people is captured in a story that many of us heard, and I will paraphrase.
Beg your pardon?
Just in Colorado, Governor, you're right, it is kidnapping, and it's extremely important for us to realize that. If you forcibly take a child from their parents' arms, you are kidnapping them. And if you take a lot of children and you put them in a detainment center, thus inflicting chronic trauma upon them, that's called child abuse. This is collective child abuse. This man has reached into the psyche of the American people, and he has harnessed fear for political purposes. So, Mr. President, if you're listening, I want you to hear me, please. You have harnessed fear for political purposes, and only love can cast that out. So sir, I have a feeling you know what you're doing. I'm going to harness love for political purposes. I will meet you on that field, and sir, love will win.
To hear you talk about the reputations of two United States senators who built their reputations and career on the segregation of race in this country. And it was not only that, but you also worked with them to oppose busing. And you know, there was a little girl in California who was part of the second class to integrate her public schools. And she was bused to school every day. And that little girl was me.
Harrowing, just harrowing stuff. Surely Joe will choose the path of grace and humility and simply accept the call out of his horrific past behavior and choose this as a moment to atone for his past actions.
Do you agree today that you were wrong to oppose busing in America then?
No,
do you agree?
I did not oppose busing in America. What I opposed is busing ordered by the Department of Education. That's what I opposed.
Well, there was a
oppose
failure of states to integrate public schools in America. I was part of the second class to integrate Berkeley, California public schools almost 2 decades after Brown v. Board of Education.
Because your city council made that decision. It was a local decision.
So that's where the federal government must step in. That's why we have the Voting Rights Act.
Thank you, Senator Harris.
These are the issues that are before us, Chuck.
I hear you. I'm asking you, please, for 1 or 2 words only.
Climate change and the lack of economic mobility Bernie talks about.
Senator Gillibrand.
Passing a family bill of rights that includes a national paid leave plan, universal pre-K, affordable daycare, and making sure that women and families can thrive in the workplace no matter who they are.
Pass a $1,000 freedom dividend for every American adult starting at age 18, which would speed us up on climate change, because if you get the boot off of people's throats, they'll focus on climate change much more clearly.
Governor Hickman.
We should have smart guns. Our enemy is the gun manufacturers, not the NRA.
Especially among children living in poverty like the ones I used to work for.
I am proof that our democracy still works.
But how come nothing really changes? How come for the last 45 years wages have been stagnant for the middle class? How come we have the highest rate of childhood poverty? How come 45 million people still have student debt? How come 3 people own more wealth than the bottom half of America? And here is the answer. Nothing will change unless we have the guts.
The poor and hardworking middle-class people. You can't do that without replacing them.